When we were doing the rounds at Quantico and kind of trying to indoctrinate ourselves and sort of look at what it had to offer, you round a corner, under the library, and there's a life-size, either wax or fiberglass rendering of Hannibal Lecter. And obviously John Doe from Seven, those movies came out around the same time, and they were both sort of in the mold of the serial killer as, Wile E. Coyote, super genius, And I think, and as I was talking to the woman who's giving us the tour, she said, well, is this show going to be like Silence of the Lambs? And I thought, no, I want to kind of take that back. I want to not talk about I don't want to talk about the gourmet, opera expert who, to me, these are very sad people who've grown up under horrendous circumstances. This is not to overstate how much empathy or sympathy we should have for them. It's just simply a fact, and it becomes and we'd seen so much of this sort of literary conceit of there's a very fine line separates the hunters from the hunted. And I really thought it was time to sort of take that back and make it really, the reason that we are fascinated with them is because we're nothing like them. There are two guys that these characters are based on, and one of them is not with us any longer, and one of them was a creative consultant with our show. And once we got into kind of trying to divide the mythology, who did what, who went where, who was the first person to say X, it got extremely complicated. And so Joe Penhall, who was the creator and the kind of head writer of the show, he decided I need to be able to divide this legwork as I need in order to be able to dramatize it, because we'll never be able to. And so he was the one who said, I'm going to call this guy this, and I'm going to call this other guy, and then I'm going to make a crazy quilt of whichever sort of behavioral impetus I need. It's conversations, conversations. It's very difficult when you're an executive producer. You have to find other directors because you literally can't direct the whole thing. 10 hours is it's too much. There's too many. So in finding the other directors that we found, there are certain people when you give them an 11-page scene that takes place at a table not unlike this and say, well, there's this movement, then the first 2 pages, and then there's this pivot, and then it moves over. Well, can't I crash something? Can't somebody jump through the window? Can we have some...
They don't trust conversation.
No, it's terrifying. Yeah. The guys that we found, interestingly enough, come, some from documentaries, and another one was a writer who had worked on the show Borgen and had made a film about a hijacking that had some of the most riveting scenes in it that were just people talking into a speakerphone. There are acts and movements in the way that people move their agenda and try to understand and look for clarification. There are and that stuff can be as interesting as people running through the street showing their badges.
Cars or whatever.
I say this often, but I think part of what makes a great performance is, at some level, you shoot a 14-hour day, you shoot 6 days a week. At some point, people are going to be exhausted. People are going to be, and there has to be an inherent thing in the actor that you can't beat out of them with a tire iron, that is always going to be, it's always underneath that surface. Curiosity, decency, and with Holden, I think people mistakenly think of it as earnestness, but what it is it's a hunger to be better. It's a hunger to understand, and Jonathan naturally has that. He's a great student. I was presented with a book in 2010 that was similar to a book that I'd read 10 years ago, and it was about the genesis of serial killer profiling, and I sort of felt like I had never done television. I didn't know I didn't understand what the compromises were going to have to be. I didn't know if I felt like it was something that I could kind of wrestle to the ground. And so I went off and did House of Cards and learned a lot. And upon return, Charlize, who had Theron, who had sent it to me, Mindhunter, she had a script, and the script was by a very talented television writer, and it was just nothing that I related to in terms of the story, in terms of how the story was laid out. It was very, and so, I kind of said, I know how to, I think I know how to do this, but I don't want to do this. And so we found Joe Penhall, who she had worked with on the road, and he came in, and we kind of talked about what it could be. And he went away and came back with a pitch that was pretty much the only way to do this, which is to dramatize the time, the place, the crater that was created by this new thinking. But we if we stayed, religiously to the chronology and called everybody by their real names and tried to get the life rights, and when a lot of people were divorced, a lot of people weren't speaking to each other, some of them were dead, and it was an inordinately complex sort of bowl of spaghetti to unwind. And he said, I don't want to deal with Robert Ressler and John Douglas. I don't want to deal with real people. I want to be free to dramatize this as it should be for the uninitiated. Because we weren't, there's a lot of shows where, they bring in the serial killer profile and the guy says, well, you're just looking for a guy who's between the ages of 28 and 35, and he's going to be 5'6", and he's going to have, pierced ears, and they're going to go through and you never kind of understand from whence this sprang. It's just it kind of ends up being gobbledygook. And this was an approach to really excavate the idea of this particular moment in time. It probably took 8 years. In the pilot episode, it's kind of 2 episodes as they begin to sort of get on their feet. A lot of this stuff may have been happening early as 74 and as late as 79. But his notion was correct, which is we can't be bootstrapped to the footnotes. We have to be able to show the audience what they need, when they need to see it in order to understand it. And so I agreed and said, absolutely, go write. And he wrote a 5-season Bible. And we took that to, I think we took it to HBO I can't remember exactly the chronology, and HBO was attempting, the project was set up at HBO, and they kept kind of trying to move the project. There's a lot of notes about, well, does it have to be 2 guys in suits? Do they have to walk through tall grass? And we were kind of like, what? And then the show True Detective came out. And we're like, oh, I see. So we took the show back, and we went to Netflix, and Netflix said, great, get us 10 scripts. And it was a very blunt force trauma organization. Find the bad guy, get the bad guy, throw him in jail, or shoot him with a machine gun. And by the 1970s, by Hoover's demise, around the time that Hoover disappeared, a couple of things happened. You have Manson, you have Zodiac, you have Son of Sam. You also had Watergate. And so the FBI was sort of reeling from a PR standpoint. And they also realized that they kind of didn't understand modern day criminality in a way. And so out of the basement grew this program of trying to sit with the most depraved minds that you could find, to have them explain what was going through your head. And it required, you had to sort of acknowledge that your enemy was human. There were things about him that you didn't understand, but if you could empathize with him, he might let you in on it. And that was an interesting notion, the notion of of this massive, let's chase him, let's find him, let's kill him, let's electrocute him, whatever. And all of a sudden they were saying, let's just have a really nice conversation. And so that was intriguing to me. I'm hoping that the relationship that I will have in 3 or 4 years with my remote control will be the same that I have of putting a good book down by the bedside table. And I am hoping that that an episode can be however long it needs to be in order to be the best version of itself, and that it doesn't have to be constrained by all of these kind of legacy packages.